He had always carried a dream tucked into the corners of his mind, a vision so vivid that it almost felt real on quiet mornings. Portugal called to him like a melody he couldn't stop humming, each thought of its sunlit streets and ocean breeze stirring something restless in his chest. It wasn't just a place, it was a new life, a chance to break free from the routines that had grown too predictable. Friends teased him about his obsession, but he didn't mind. He had a plan, and he believed that plans, when followed with unwavering dedication, rarely failed. There was a spark in his eyes when he spoke about it, a kind of hope that was contagious, though often paired with a slight awkwardness that made casual conversations a little tricky. Still, he carried on, letting the dream guide each choice he made, big or small. Every morning, without fail, he immersed himself in intensive Spanish classes, a step he knew was essential before even thinking about packing a bag for Portugal. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk dust and coffee, a combination that had become oddly comforting over the weeks. He scribbled notes furiously, repeating phrases under his breath until they felt etched into muscle memory. Other students often glanced at him, half amused, half impressed by his single-minded focus. Social interactions sometimes felt like another language altogether, something he approached cautiously and with careful calculation. Yet, each lesson, each verb memorized, felt like another brick laid on the path to his dream. Dedication wasn't new to him, but this particular routine demanded a discipline he hadn't known he possessed. There were nights when exhaustion tugged at his limbs like invisible chains, but he pushed on, believing that rest could wait and ambition could not. His slight awkwardness in social settings only grew more pronounced as his life narrowed down to verbs, vocabulary, and pronunciation drills. Coffee became a near-constant companion, its bitter warmth both a comfort and a lifeline. Evenings blurred into mornings, and while the world around him carried on, he remained in a bubble of focus, caught between exhilaration and isolation. Every glance at a map of Portugal was a reminder that this commitment, exhausting as it was, might one day lead him to streets bathed in golden light. As days bled into weeks, the intensity of his schedule started to shape not just his mind, but his very sense of time. Breakfasts were quick, almost ritualistic, and evenings slipped past unnoticed as he clung to textbooks like lifelines. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of life outside, neighbors laughing, children chasing balls, the world moving on without him, and felt a twinge of longing he couldn't quite name. Yet, there was also a thrill in the struggle, a quiet pride in knowing he was sacrificing ordinary comfort for something extraordinary. He learned to cherish small victories, mastering a tricky conjugation, catching the subtle rhythm of a sentence, or understanding a joke in Spanish without hesitation. Each success felt like a nudge from fate, reminding him that dreams, when pursued with grit, could inch closer to reality. Despite his disciplined exterior, loneliness lingered in soft, almost imperceptible ways. The evenings, though productive, were quiet, too quiet. Conversations with friends became brief, text-based check-ins that carried the weight of someone distant. He missed casual laughter, the unpredictability of human connection, the comforting messiness of shared meals. But he also knew he had chosen this path, and within that choice, a strange satisfaction took root. There was a rhythm to his days, a sense that each exhausting step was an investment in something larger than himself. Sometimes, when he paused to look out the window at the twilight sky, a gentle wave of hope mingled with fatigue, whispering that the horizon he longed for wasn't just a dream, it was coming. And yet, the closer he got to his goal, the more fragile his balance became. Every new verb memorized, every lesson completed, drew him further from the life he had known, isolating him even as he inched toward Portugal. Friends' invitations went unanswered, nights grew longer, and the hum of the city outside seemed both distant and mocking. He was learning not just a language, but the limits of his own endurance, discovering corners of patience, stubbornness, and longing that he hadn't met before. Still, there was a strange comfort in the routine, a sense that every lonely evening, every cup of strong coffee, was another step closer to the sun-drenched streets of his dream city. The tension was subtle but growing, a quiet pressure that hinted the story was about to shift. Even in the quietest moments, his mind rarely rested. Nighttime became a tangle of grammar drills, flashcards, and mental rehearsals of conversations he might have in Portugal. Sometimes he caught himself imagining walking along cobblestone streets, the salty breeze of the ocean brushing against his face, and a strange mix of anticipation and nervousness would tighten in his chest. The dream felt almost tangible then, like he could reach out and touch it. Yet the reality of his current solitude reminded him how far he still had to go. He wondered if the sacrifices, missed dinners, skipped outings, restless nights, were worth it, and deep down, he knew the answer had to be yes. Every fiber of his being whispered that this was his path, even if it meant walking it alone for now. Yet, amid the isolation, small sparks of connection appeared in unexpected places. A smile from a classmate, a kind nod from his teacher, or a casual word of encouragement became lifelines, fleeting but meaningful. They reminded him that even the most solitary journeys had threads tying them to the world, subtle signs that he wasn't completely cut off. His awkwardness in social settings still lingered, but it softened in these brief moments, revealing a warmth and sincerity that only those paying close attention could see. And in those fleeting exchanges, he felt the delicate stirrings of something he hadn't anticipated, human connection, fragile yet persistent, reminding him that life wasn't only about reaching a destination. The dream, the plan, and the discipline all coexisted now with an unspoken tension. He was driven, focused, and undeniably awkward, yet there was an undercurrent of hope threading through each exhausting day. He could feel the contours of the life he longed for, yet it hovered just beyond reach, teasing him with its proximity. The city, the streets, the sunlit mornings, everything he imagined was just around the corner. But first, he had to navigate the labyrinth of his own determination and the subtle loneliness that accompanied it. As he closed his books for another night, exhaustion mingled with anticipation, leaving him on the edge of something new, though he didn't yet know what awaited him. The mornings came early, and he was already at his desk before the sun had fully stretched across the sky. Spanish books, notebooks, and a half-empty coffee mug were scattered around him, evidence of long nights that had blurred seamlessly into the next day. His routine had become almost ritualistic, each lesson following the last like clockwork, a relentless cadence that left little room for distraction. The words of the language swirled in his mind even outside class, creeping into daydreams and mundane moments, reshaping the way he thought and felt. It was exhausting, yes, but also exhilarating. Each phrase mastered felt like a small victory, a tangible step closer to his dream. And there, in the midst of conjugations and vocabulary drills, he began to notice her presence in ways he hadn't before. Paola had a way of moving through the classroom that was effortless, almost mesmerizing. Her charm wasn't loud or flashy, it was in the subtle gestures, the tilt of her head when she corrected a pronunciation, or the gentle encouragement she offered when frustration crept in. He found himself waiting for her words, hanging on to the rhythm of her explanations as if they were music. There were tiny sparks in her smile, fleeting moments when their eyes met, and he felt a flutter he wasn't accustomed to. Something about the way she guided the students, patient yet teasing, made him acutely aware of her presence, and though he tried to remain focused, he caught himself counting the minutes until their interactions. Immersion was becoming all-consuming. Days merged with nights, the distinction fading as study sessions stretched longer and longer. He sometimes forgot whether the sun had risen or set, caught in a whirl of lessons, repetition, and mental exercises. The classroom lights, the hum of the heater, the soft scratch of pen on paper, these became constants, anchoring him in a world that was at once familiar and disorienting. He could feel the pull of exhaustion tugging at his thoughts, yet curiosity and desire kept him tethered to his work, especially when Paola's presence lingered nearby. The balance was delicate, and though he barely noticed it at first, the intensity of his schedule was quietly setting the stage for something unexpected. Even as the days grew longer, he clung to his routine with almost stubborn determination. The lessons seemed endless, a steady rhythm of verbs, phrases, and pronunciation drills that left him mentally drained but strangely alive. He began noticing the subtle signs of fatigue creeping into his own reflections, moments when words blurred together, or he misread a sentence he had mastered days ago. Yet it wasn't just exhaustion that weighed on him. There was a thrill in testing his limits, in seeing how far dedication could carry him before the human body and mind demanded a pause. Coffee became more than a companion. It was a lifeline, a ritual that marked the boundary between conscious perseverance and the fog of sleep he was fighting to stave off. Paola's presence grew more magnetic with each lesson, her charm weaving effortlessly into the classroom air. She had a natural rhythm, balancing firmness and warmth, making the most complex explanations seem simple. He started noticing the way she looked at him when he got a phrase slightly wrong, a flicker of amusement in her eyes, a subtle lift of her brow, almost like a silent acknowledgement of his effort. Those small moments became highlights of his grueling schedule, little sparks that reminded him there was more to life than textbooks and drills. And though he tried to stay professional and focused, he couldn't deny the pull she created, a gentle tug at the edges of his awareness that left him feeling unexpectedly vulnerable. The line between day and night blurred completely as fatigue deepened, and his body began to protest against the relentless pace he had set for himself. Long hours had begun to rearrange his internal clock, leaving him disoriented, a little untethered from the world outside the classroom. He would find himself staring out the window, unsure if it was morning or evening, and yet strangely comforted by the familiar hum of lessons in progress. This constant immersion carried with it both exhilaration and unease, as though he was teetering on the edge of something unknown. The tension was subtle but persistent, an undercurrent suggesting that this rhythm, no matter how disciplined, could lead to an unexpected moment, one that might change everything. One late evening, the exhaustion finally caught up with him in a way he hadn't anticipated. The classroom was quiet, the fluorescent lights casting a soft glow over textbooks and notebooks, and he realized his eyelids were heavy, fighting a battle they could no longer win. Paola noticed immediately, her eyes softening with concern as she approached, a gentle reminder that even the most disciplined had limits. His mind raced, juggling embarrassment with gratitude. He didn't want to appear weak, yet the comfort of her presence was oddly reassuring. In that quiet moment, the relentless pace of his studies collided with the human need for rest, and he felt the precarious balance of his life tilt ever so slightly. Paola's subtle attentions were impossible to ignore, small gestures carrying a weight he hadn't been prepared for. A hand placed briefly on his shoulder, a careful pause in her instructions, the way she watched him with a mix of amusement and care. It all chipped away at the barriers he had built around himself. He felt a flutter of self-consciousness, unsure of how much of his growing admiration she had noticed, and a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a shared understanding between them. The intensity of his studies, the blur of day into night, suddenly felt like the perfect storm, bringing them together in ways he hadn't imagined while he was lost in verbs and conjugations. And as the evening stretched on, the lines between teacher and student, exhaustion and vulnerability, began to blur. He was caught in a swirl of fatigue, admiration, and a quiet curiosity about Paola that had been simmering under the surface. For the first time, he wondered how far this connection could go, whether it was only a fleeting moment in the midst of his studies or the beginning of something more. There was an unspoken tension, an electric current in the air that made every glance and gesture feel amplified, and somewhere deep inside, he knew that the next moment, when he finally gave in to sleep, might be the one that would shift everything, setting the stage for something neither of them could fully predict. He hadn't meant for it to happen. One moment, he was reviewing vocabulary at Paola's cozy apartment, the soft hum of music and the scent of her coffee filling the room, and the next, the exhaustion he'd been fighting for weeks won. His head nodded, a slow surrender, and before he realized it, sleep had claimed him. Panic bubbled under the surface even as his body relaxed. He wasn't supposed to be here like this. Not under her roof, not in this way. Embarrassment prickled at his cheeks, a hot, uncomfortable reminder that he'd crossed an unspoken boundary. Yet, even in the haze of fatigue, there was a strange warmth in the room, the kind that made the world outside feel distant, almost irrelevant. He felt both small and oddly safe, caught between anxiety and a comfort he didn't expect. In his half-dreaming state, thoughts tumbled over one another. What would she think when she noticed? Would she laugh? Scold him? Or worse, see him differently forever? He felt the weight of social awkwardness pressing down, memories of past blunders flashing across his mind like cautionary tales. And yet, he couldn't stop the curiosity that flickered alongside the embarrassment. Paola, so poised and attentive, had a way of making even the most mundane moments feel charged with meaning. Every little movement she made seemed amplified in his tired mind. Every soft chuckle, every tilt of her head. Sleep made his thoughts messy, but it also made them honest, exposing a vulnerability he rarely let anyone see. Meanwhile, Paola noticed, of course, there was a pause in her usual rhythm as she caught sight of him, head resting lightly on the table, soft breaths betraying his tired state. She studied him for a moment, curiosity and something unspoken flickering in her eyes. A quiet thought crept in. Did he trust her enough to let his guard down, even this way? The question lingered, charged with an unexpected tension. She wondered how much to intervene, how much to allow, and in the gentle silence of the evening, the rules of their usual teacher-student boundaries felt flexible, almost fluid. The night stretched ahead, full of possibility, leaving them both poised on the edge of something neither fully understood yet. As the night deepened, he shifted slightly in his sleep, a faint murmur escaping his lips, and Paola's attention sharpened. She felt a mixture of amusement and concern, a pull she hadn't expected to feel so strongly. Part of her wanted to wake him, to make sure he was all right, but another part lingered, quietly studying the vulnerability etched across his face. It was in these unguarded moments that she saw him differently, more human, more present, and somehow even more endearing. Her mind wandered to the weeks of his relentless dedication, the fatigue etched in the lines around his eyes, and she wondered how much of this exhaustion was worth the dream he clung to so fiercely. He stirred awake briefly, blinking against the dim light, confusion clouding his expression. His heart raced, a jumble of embarrassment and curiosity, and he realized he had no idea what time it was, what day it was, or what Paola might think of him now. A shy, awkward laugh threatened to escape, but he swallowed it, caught in the delicate tension between propriety and the intimacy of the moment. Every movement she made seemed magnified, every glance a subtle question he wasn't sure how to answer, and beneath the surface of panic, there was a flicker of something else, a strange warmth that told him this night, this unexpected vulnerability, might be something more than just a mistake. Paola leaned back slightly, observing him with a quiet intensity, her thoughts a mix of hesitation and intrigue. She sensed the trust implicit in his exhaustion, a bridge he hadn't consciously built but had allowed to form. It made her heart beat a little faster, a soft awareness that what they shared in this moment was fragile and significant all at once. She contemplated whether to speak, to break the tension with words, or let silence linger, letting the night guide them naturally. Something unspoken hovered between them, a delicate current of curiosity, vulnerability, and possibility, making each second feel charged with potential. And as the room held its quiet rhythm, it became clear that the night was far from over, and that the morning would bring revelations neither of them had anticipated. The quiet of the night seemed to stretch endlessly, and he woke again, fully aware this time, heart pounding as he tried to orient himself. The room felt smaller, warmer, charged with the weight of the unspoken, and he realized just how close he was to Paola, how unfamiliar yet natural it felt. Embarrassment surged, but beneath it was curiosity, a strange pull that made him want to understand this new dimension of their connection. He couldn't quite untangle his thoughts, what was appropriate, what was accidental, and what might be something more. Each glance her way seemed to carry meaning he wasn't ready to define, and yet the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was electric, holding a promise that words might ruin. Paola noticed his sudden awareness and met his gaze with a calm, steady look that belied her own racing thoughts. She wondered how much he understood about the tension lingering between them, how much was a reflection of his fatigue, and how much hinted at something deeper. Her heartbeat quickened, and a soft smile tugged at her lips, a gentle acknowledgement of their shared vulnerability. She debated breaking the silence, offering a word, a joke, a gesture, but part of her wanted to let the moment stretch, to see how he would navigate this new, fragile intimacy. The night had transformed into a quiet arena of emotions neither had expected, a space where boundaries blurred and possibilities unfolded. Even in his uncertainty, he felt a shift, subtle but undeniable, in how he saw her. Paola was no longer just a teacher, a guide through the labyrinth of language. She was a presence that stirred something unfamiliar, yet thrilling inside him. He wondered how they had reached this moment, what unspoken choices and quiet glances had led them here, and whether this night would change everything between them. The room seemed suspended in time, each second stretching longer, each breath heavier, holding them both on the brink of discovery. And in that fragile, intimate silence, it became clear that the night was far from ordinary, and that whatever happened next would ripple into every corner of their lives. The night had settled around them like a soft, velvety curtain, and the room felt smaller, more intimate than ever before. He was still reeling from the events that had led him here, heart pounding, mind spinning between embarrassment and curiosity. Every glance Paola gave carried a weight he wasn't used to, a mixture of care, intrigue, and something unspoken that made his chest tighten. She sat nearby, careful not to crowd him, yet impossibly close in the way presence can be felt without touch. Their usual roles, teacher and student, felt suspended, replaced by something more human, more raw. And in that suspension, both sensed the fragile beginnings of a connection neither had dared name before. Paola's thoughts were a careful balancing act between honesty and hesitation. She had felt the pull toward him, subtle but undeniable, yet the rules of her position had kept her cautious. Now, seeing him so vulnerable, she debated whether to let herself voice what she had kept tucked away. Her heart ached with the tension of wanting to speak and fearing the consequences, each beat a reminder that this night was unlike any other. She found herself smiling softly, a quiet warmth that invited him into a space of shared trust, and in that smile lay the gentle courage to break through barriers built over weeks of routine and distance. He noticed the shift immediately, the subtle change in the way she looked at him, the way her voice softened when she spoke. There was a curiosity in his eyes, a mix of surprise and longing that made the room hum with quiet energy. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about verbs, grammar, or conjugations. He was focused entirely on her, on the unspoken dialogue flowing between them. Laughter bubbled up unexpectedly, breaking the tension in small, delicate waves, and he realized how much he had missed genuine, unguarded connection. The night was stretching, alive with possibility, and both of them were navigating the thrill and fear of stepping into something undefined, yet electric. Paola finally decided to speak, her voice low and steady, breaking the fragile quiet that had settled around them. Her words weren't grand declarations, but simple truths, gentle confessions that hinted at the feelings she had held back. He listened, rapt, each sentence sending a shiver of surprise and curiosity through him. The vulnerability in her voice mirrored his own, creating a bridge that neither had crossed before. In that moment, the room felt suspended in time. Every ordinary detail, the soft hum of the heater, the muted city sounds outside, taking on a deeper, almost sacred significance. The air between them carried both tension and tenderness, a delicate interplay that left their hearts racing in unison. He struggled to respond at first, caught between disbelief, delight, and a surge of nerves. Words felt heavy, inadequate, but he managed a soft laugh, a quirk of a smile, and the faintest brush of humor that broke the remaining ice. Every subtle gesture she made, the tilt of her head, the flicker of her eyes, felt magnified, loaded with meaning he had never experienced in a classroom. The shared honesty created a fragile intimacy, a sense that for these moments, nothing else in the world existed outside this quiet room. He realized that every lesson, every late night, every moment of dedication that had brought him here had been building toward this very connection. And yet, the night remained gentle, careful, and unhurried. Their conversation meandered through laughter, small confessions, and shy acknowledgments of feelings that had lingered beneath the surface. Paola's subtle touches, a hand brushing a stray hair from his forehead, a quiet nod of understanding, spoke volumes without words. He felt his own defenses dissolve, replaced by a warmth and openness he rarely allowed himself. The night wasn't about declarations or conclusions. It was about discovering the quiet depth of connection, the kind that shifts everything beneath the surface without forcing it. And somewhere in the soft glow of the room, both sensed that this night would leave a permanent mark on how they saw each other and themselves. The hours seemed to stretch, folding in on themselves, as their conversation wove between laughter, reflection, and moments of tender silence. He felt a pull he couldn't explain, a magnetic force that made every glance, every gesture, feel monumental. Paola's presence was both grounding and exhilarating, a reminder that the human heart could navigate fear and desire at once. There were no rushes, no grand gestures, only quiet honesty, soft confessions, and the delicate rhythm of two people discovering each other in real time. Every subtle movement, every inflection in her voice, drew him deeper into a connection that had quietly been building, layer by layer, over countless lessons and shared glances. She watched him with a careful mixture of fascination and restraint, noting the small details he often overlooked, the way he furrowed his brow when thinking, the slight tremor in his hands from fatigue, the warmth in his eyes when he laughed. These little human gestures, so ordinary in isolation, now carried weight, significance, and meaning that neither of them had anticipated. Paola felt her own walls soften, allowing her feelings to surface with a clarity that surprised even her. In the shared vulnerability of the night, they were no longer teacher and student, no longer distant acquaintances. They were simply two hearts navigating the fragile, thrilling space of truth. And as the night edged toward dawn, a sense of quiet inevitability settled over them. Something had shifted, irreversibly, subtly, yet profoundly. He realized that this evening, these confessions, and the intimacy they shared without pretense, had changed everything. The tension, curiosity, and connection threaded through the room like a living thing, promising that whatever morning brought, it would not erase the profound closeness they had discovered. And beneath it all, an unspoken question lingered, waiting for the light of day. How would this delicate new bond survive the return to the outside world, where roles, rules, and responsibilities still exist? Morning arrived quietly, slipping through the curtains with a soft golden glow that highlighted the lingering intimacy of the night. He stirred first, blinking against the light, suddenly aware of how close he had been to Paola, and the awkward tension of what had passed hit him in waves. His mind raced with questions. What had he imagined? What had been real? And how could he navigate the fragile line between honesty and propriety? Yet, amid the embarrassment, there was a warmth, a lingering sense that last night had revealed something authentic, a connection he hadn't dared hope for. He took a deep breath, listening to the quiet rhythms of the apartment, each sound a reminder that the night had changed the way he saw both her and himself. Paola, awake now as well, gave a small, tentative smile that softened the edges of his anxiety. Her eyes held a mixture of humor, reassurance, and quiet curiosity, and he realized that the night hadn't left awkwardness as sharp as he had feared. Conversation began slowly, tentative questions and gentle laughter filling the space between them. He felt the weight of unspoken words, the potential of new beginnings, and a quiet relief that honesty seemed possible. Every small gesture, her hand brushing a stray hair from her face, the way she leaned just slightly toward him, spoke volumes, reminding him that human connection could be tender, complex, and hopeful all at once. Even in the aftermath, the intensity of their shared night lingered, coloring mundane details with meaning. The simple act of making coffee, the sound of the city outside, the warmth of sunlight on the floor, everything seemed heightened, infused with a quiet awareness of their bond. He reflected on the journey that had led him here, the relentless study, the sacrifices, the loneliness, and finally the night that had shifted everything. And somewhere beneath the morning's calm, he felt a sense of clarity emerging, an understanding that dreams, connections, and growth were intertwined, and that this new chapter of his life was just beginning to unfold. The conversation grew more natural as the morning unfolded, filled with small admissions and shy laughter that eased the lingering tension. Paola spoke with gentle honesty, acknowledging her own surprise at the intimacy of the night, while he shared his nervous reflections, careful yet open. There was no rush, no need to define everything immediately, just a shared understanding that something meaningful had begun. Each glance and soft smile carried reassurance, a quiet promise that their connection was real, fragile though it might be. He realized that the vulnerability he had feared would be awkward instead created a new closeness, a space where both could be themselves, without pretense or judgment. He noticed the subtle changes in their dynamic, the ease that replaced the strict teacher-student boundaries that had defined their interactions before. The way she listened, the soft nods of encouragement, the careful but meaningful touches, all of it created a rhythm that felt natural and comforting. It struck him how quickly the night had shifted something fundamental between them, and how those small gestures now carried weight and intention. Even the simplest moments, passing a mug, sharing a laugh, leaning slightly closer to hear a whispered thought, felt loaded with significance, hinting at possibilities he had not allowed himself to imagine before. And through it all, his dream of Portugal remained alive, but it no longer existed in isolation. The thought of moving, building a life in a sunlit city by the ocean, now intertwined with the warmth of connection and the possibility of love. He saw that his ambitions and his personal growth were no longer separate from the relationships he was forming. They were part of the same journey. Paola's presence was a reminder that life's biggest rewards often arrived in unexpected ways, and that courage, honesty, and a willingness to be vulnerable could open doors he had never dared knock on before. And as the morning light deepened, both felt that their story was only just beginning, leaving the future open, hopeful, and full of promise. The day unfolded gently, carrying with it a mixture of reflection and quiet anticipation. He and Paola moved through their morning with an ease born from honesty, their interactions marked by laughter, subtle glances, and the comforting rhythm of shared understanding. Each small gesture, passing a plate, adjusting a chair, the brief touch of hands, felt significant, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and connection they had built overnight. The world outside continued on its usual pace, but inside the apartment, time seemed to bend, making space for a new chapter neither had anticipated. He felt a profound gratitude, not just for her presence, but for the way their honesty had opened a door to something real. Thoughts of Portugal lingered, but they no longer existed as a solitary dream. The idea of moving, of stepping into the sun-drenched streets and vibrant culture, was now intertwined with the possibility of a shared journey. Even if the exact path remained uncertain, he realized that personal growth and human connection were not mutually exclusive. They were part of the same unfolding story. Paola, too, sensed the shift, the quiet but undeniable promise of something deeper than friendship or professional boundaries. It was a delicate balance, but one that felt exciting rather than frightening, full of potential rather than risk. And in that morning light, a sense of hope settled over them. The night of confessions had changed everything, leaving behind clarity, warmth, and the exhilarating uncertainty of what was yet to come. They both understood that this was just the beginning of a relationship, of personal growth, and of a life that could hold both dreams and intimacy. As they exchanged one last smile before stepping into the day, the unspoken promise lingered: new opportunities, unexpected connections, and a future that was bright, open, and full of possibility.